Hi, this is video number 369, not 396. Okay, 369. You see weather here, windy, chilly, but pretty nice for for a fall day, nice day. Did a workout this morning since we have big eating coming up here tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day, and that. You see what else? I wanted to mention yesterday. I went over to the grocery store to get the newspaper. I went in and I didn't actually, they hadn't put it on the shelves yet. But anyway, as I was walking in there, I saw this old guy walking out, and his beard was like, gee, it was probably like 6, 8 inches longer than mine. It was like really long. He was a lot older than me, but I thought, well, gee, my beard's not that long, so compared to him, my beard's pretty short. But that was interesting because it was just like, I wasn't quite in the door and I saw this guy walking out, and he was, yeah. It was a big beard. Eli Bus Duty. Let me see. Yesterday, it always seems when he has troubles, it's in math class. He doesn't want to pay attention. He wants to disrupt. Yesterday, he was doing something yesterday during math class. So it seems like it's always math. So I'm thinking maybe we need to like explore math a little bit. Today at Eli Bus Duty today, we played games. We played this one that was like a silly, weird game, and then he wanted to play some game where they were actually math questions. They were like addition and subtraction, really, really easy. He had some trouble with that. Now he is in first grade. I don't think I did any kind of math in first grade other than learn my numbers, but he especially had trouble with the subtraction. He's doing the finger thing, counting. So I'm going to try to maybe help him out with that a little bit. There's a couple ways you can do subtraction. We were starting to do that. Like my wife was playing too, and she didn't want me to confuse him. But I mean, right now he's just counting his fingers, which maybe in first grade that's okay. But I want him to develop where he likes math. It was almost entertaining for me. I loved math when I was a kid. Get him to where he really likes it, and then maybe math class will be his favorite class, and then he won't have to, disrupt people during math class. He's a pretty good reader, actually. He's very good at reading. I would say he's much stronger reading than with the math. But hey, he's Happy's grandson. He has to know math. He's got to know math because math is so cool. Okay, let me see what else. Food pantry, food bank later on this afternoon. It's 10:45 right now in the morning. Tonight we're going to be doing the 3rd annual Thanksgiving Eve sleepover at my son's. My daughter comes in with Eli, and Pappy's in there. I'm in there with them, and we usually will watch a movie, have like pizza or something, and have a good time. Talk. The three of us, my daughter and son and myself, we don't often get chances where it's just the three of us to talk. So that's always fun. I think I'm gonna go in there at like 5 o'clock, and my son's going out tonight for some sort of Thanksgiving Eve smorgasbord buffet thing with someone. So he'll be back later, so he won't be having the pizza. And then tomorrow, of course, is Thanksgiving and the turkey and all that. That's always kind of fun too. It's always fun to eat. I like that meal, but sometimes, like if I eat too much filling or something, then the rest of the day is just kind of wasted. I don't feel good, so I tend to lay off the filling anymore. I used to love filling, but I tend to lay off of that. Okay, I want to talk about a couple emails first before I read some more of the book. Let me think which one this is first. Okay, this is one I got. I thought maybe if I would read it here and give my response to this person, it would help, because this is all common stuff, but it's always good now and then to remind all of you, yes, I mean, these are common symptoms and so on. So his email was, "Hey Don, okay, thanks again for replying." And he had sent me an email earlier. Probably a cliche thing to say at this point, but I'm sure I would be much worse off if I hadn't the chance to talk to you about withdrawal. I'll try to take it easy when it comes to exercise. Okay, his question earlier was about exercise, and it seems to help him, but yet if you do too much, it can rev you up in that. It seems that the intensification of symptoms is temporary only. I slept last night and woke up with the symptoms being more or less on baseline. I've got one other question as well. One of the things that I've noticed is how dull everything is. Whenever I read something, watch something, or try to even think of something, everything just seems so dull, as if all the life from my brain has been sucked out. Even when I try to think about my life before withdrawal, all the years before 2016, the memories that pop up seem to belong to a completely different person. This is not related to depersonalization, derealization. I'm sure of that. It has to be the benzos. Do you think this will go away? Did you have anything like it? Did it go away for you? Okay, and I did respond. I'll read my response here and then maybe talk a little bit. And I wrote, this is pretty common. We forget who we once were almost completely. It's as though the only person we know ourselves to be is the one who is currently suffering. In withdrawal, I was terrified of who I might be when I got well. If I ever got well, I had no idea whatsoever. I have often written and spoken about what it was like when I started to feel well. It was very much like seeing the former me returning to the current me. I recognized myself immediately, but I was actually a vastly improved me compared to the former me. It was very strange but awesomely cool at the same time. It will definitely go away as you start to feel well. Okay. Yeah, I've talked about this a good bit. We all worry about. I was extremely worried about. I was terrified of who I might be when I got through withdrawal. Even when I got off of the drugs, when I got off the Klonopin, because I had spent many, many years, decades, drinking and then taking benzos the last 12, 13 years. And I had no idea who I might be because I had always had chemicals in my brain, mood-altering chemicals. And I remember explaining that to my therapist, and that's when she told me I was married to my drugs. I've said that before. It was so she didn't understand. But anyway, as I jumped from the Klonopin, there was no vast change in my personality. But as you go through withdrawal, you feel like someone else. You just feel horrible and nasty. And you think like you can't remember your former life so much. I remember things that happened, but I didn't remember like my mood, how I was as far as my mental status, my emotions, and so forth. Because, as I said here, all you feel is the misery. Your current misery is all you feel. That's how it was. I talk about my 2 blank years in my life. In the book, I talked about it. 1998 was a blank year. 2010 was a blank year. It was like, I can remember some stuff from it, but it was like I had no feeling, I was just in misery. I was in constant misery. That was my world. I couldn't recall hardly anything else other than what was related to my misery, going to doctor's appointments, going to see the therapists, stuff like that. I couldn't. So it's really common to kind of like forget who you were. And then there's the worry, like, well, am I going to be like this forever? Who am I going to be when this is over? Like you realize who you were once you start to feel well. And in fact, you're better, you're stronger, you're better. So it's not really once you start feeling well, it's not really a problem. But as we are suffering, it is a problem because we can't remember anything other than misery. Okay, the next is 2 emails. The first email here is from this particular person from May. She had written to me in May, and then she sent me another one last evening. Okay, this one is, hello, I'm looking for hope. I have successfully titrated off Klonopin, which I was put on in 1994 for a nervous breakdown. I'm 57 years old and started titrating last June. Okay, that would have been June of last year. Okay, last year. My last dose was April 22, so that was about a 10-month taper. I am unable to eat or sleep. I have been asleep twice since April 22nd, and this was in May. Okay, I'm losing hope that I can beat this. There are no words to describe what I have been through. Is there anybody else that beat this drug? Okay. That was her first email to me, and then she had sent me a few emails after that in May of earlier this year. Okay. Okay, the follow-up email I got last night, it says, "Hi Don, I wrote to you in May, I think, asking for help with sleep. Oh my goodness, I had no idea that was just the calm before the storm. Anyway, I survived the hell of tapering off 2 milligrams of Klonopin. I didn't sleep for over 6 months, sometimes getting 5 or 10 minutes of sleep. I have aged. Oh boy, have I aged. Completely gray." Okay. Anyway, I did survive it. I was unable to talk for several months after coming off. and I still struggle with speaking at times, but for the most part, the psychosis is over. I am calling it psychosis because I don't know a word in the English language to describe it. Is there such a word? I don't think so. Anyway, I think you told me to hang in there and that it was very easy, very early in my withdrawal. The doctor said, you'll be fine in 2 weeks. Laughing out loud. I had to learn to walk and talk again. These doctors have no idea. They really are clueless. Thanks for the website. It saved me in my darkest days. God bless. Okay. Okay. So she was in dire straits back in May. She had jumped from her Klonopin, probably a 40-week taper. She couldn't sleep. She just could not sleep. I remember those days when, I did have the Remeron, so that I did get some very, very broken sleep every night pretty much. Without the Remeron, I don't know. Like a nap in the afternoon for me was like, it was just moments. Sometimes it was like, I think I just fell asleep and woke up in a terror within seconds actually. But most of the time it was just minutes at a time. So the Remeron did help me to sleep, but a lot of people get essentially no sleep in withdrawal. And it's hard because that's when you can turn your brain off a little bit and not have to keep going over all of the obsessive, intrusive thoughts and the constant looping of thoughts. Let me see what else. Psychosis. I don't know. I've talked about this before. There is no word to describe this. There's no. I've probably written millions of words now and spoken millions of words. There is not a word that describes the misery. Just the intense misery, the number of symptoms we get that are horrible. The duration of this, the unendingness, like for some of us, it does not, you don't get a break at all, ever. Like it just goes on and on and on and on, and that's why sleep is so important. There's not a word for it. There really is not. Psychosis, I guess, is, I don't know. There's not a word. There's not. She's right about that. Okay, and I've told a lot, I try not to use the words hang in there too much because we all say that. And I do remember saying, like, it's early in your withdrawal, like, but doctors saying, and I was told this, and many of you are, oh, you'll be okay in a few weeks. When I left the hospital, the psych hospital, after, like, they got me off of 4 milligrams of Klonopin in 3 weeks, she told me in 48 hours you will be well, your withdrawal will be over. And I was just I was in oblivion then. I could, in my head, I thought, I think you're probably wrong about that, lady, and she was. I had to reinstate and then go through the whole thing anyway. But yeah, the doctors just, I think they know there's long withdrawal, but they can have no idea how bad it feels, what it is actually like. And it goes back to what she said here about using the word psychosis. There is no word to describe this. There is no way you can make somebody feel like this. The only way they can truly, truly, truly understand is if they actually have these feelings, they actually go through it. I think even one day, if somebody had just even one day of feeling the way we feel for day after day after day, they would understand and they would have more compassion. There would be more of that out there. Anyway, she seems to be doing much, much better now. In May, she was in a bad way in May, in dire straits, but that's awesome. That's awesome. So people do get well. We do get well. It just kind of, for some of us, it happens relatively quickly when it does happen. For some, it's just a gradual thing. So that's an example of like someone who, okay, she was bad like back in May, but this is now 6 months later, she's doing much, much better. So that's cool. Let me see where I'm at here with time. 14 minutes. Okay, I want to read some here. Chapter 11, I think, is a really long chapter. So I'll start with it and then close at some point. Okay, I'm at page 197, which is the beginning of chapter 11, I believe. Okay, I'm sitting at home here. I'm well. I'm up in the living room looking out the window. Okay, Lee's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a noise. Ruth had apparently come down the stairs with a load of laundry and walked past Lee into the laundry room adjacent to the family room, only a few feet from where Lee was sitting. Okay, I was actually in the family room when this chapter starts. Okay, the noise he heard was the washing machine. He picked up his cup from the table and took a sip. The coffee was cold. He had been so deep in his contemplations that he had forgotten about his coffee. Oh well, cold coffee and loud noise. It was a signal to get on with the day. He grabbed his cup, ascended the stairs into the kitchen, and poured the cold coffee into the sink. Time to sweat. Exercise was an activity that made Lee feel alive. It was excellent for his mood and mental clarity, especially with some nice loud fusion jazz playing. This morning it would be Return to Forever's Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy. Okay, Return to Forever was a jazz, like a fusion jazz band back in the day. He changed into a pair of sweatpants and went into the room that was once Michael's bedroom. It had been converted into a combination sewing room and exercise room 5 years ago, excuse me, when Michael moved out. It now contained a quilting table, an elliptical machine, and a total gym. Lee picked up the remote, hit play, and the music began. As Lee was going through his routine on the total gym, he could feel the endorphins doing their job. It was very nice. In between sets of 5 separate exercises, Lee would usually rest for about 45 seconds. This was when his mind felt the most active and clear. His thoughts returned to the subject of chemical imbalance. He was still trying to make sense of it. All 8 of the prescribing psychiatrists whom he had seen offered only one solution to his mental and emotional difficulties: psychiatric drugs. He had always been prescribed at least one drug. Usually counseling and therapy were recommended as adjuncts to the drugs. Now that Lee had run the gauntlet through the mental health care system and was well, he could see that therapy and counseling had been useless for him. His brain had been so over-medicated that he was completely incapable of gaining any benefits from counseling, trying to tolerate the drugging, and withdrawing from the drugs, that it was completely incapable of helping itself. He was unable to resolve issues from his past. He couldn't. His mind would just not allow it. Perhaps if he had received therapy and counseling without drugging, he would have had a chance at a quicker recovery. But that was not how it had played out for him. Psychiatrists seemed to go straight to a pharmacological approach, prescribing drugs for chemical imbalances, whether or not there appeared to be any supportive objective data or information. If that theory had been corroborated by objective data, Lee was certain that psychiatry would share it with the rest of the world immediately. Their silence on the matter seemed to be more evidence that most of their diagnoses and treatments relied on mere speculation. Lee tried to think of an analogy. In his mind, it was like taking a car to a mechanic for repair. This particular mechanic's repair repertoire consisted of only 3 types of repair. He could replace the engine, replace the transmission, or replace the tires. For every automobile brought in for repair, the mechanic did only one of these 3 things, irrespective of what was wrong with the vehicle. Of course, you would take your car somewhere else if it didn't need a new engine, transmission, or tires. Unfortunately, all the other repair shops did exactly the same thing. To make matters worse, the repair shops only had engines and transmissions available for 10 different models of vehicles, and they sold only 2 sizes of tires. All the engines, transmissions, and tires were chosen randomly from the shop's inventory. It was a grab bag of sorts. If you wanted your car repaired, you needed to assess the probability that the mechanic would fix your problem. Of course, there was a greater probability that you would leave with a much bigger, more difficult problem. Maybe your car wouldn't work at all. If your car's problem had nothing to do with the engine, transmission, or tires, you were out of luck. Anything the shop did would not help your problem. If the mechanic replaced your engine or transmission with parts for another model, or tried to force the wrong size tires onto your car, you would be in for a rough ride home from the repair shop, if you got home at all. The probability that you would be a completely satisfied customer was low, but still possible. The likelihood that the repair would do something to harm the performance of your car and still not affect the original problem was high. You were left with no other options. You wouldn't want to keep driving the car until the problem got so bad that the vehicle no longer functioned properly. You had heard that there were automotive repair courses where it might be possible to learn how to perform the repairs yourself using any parts that were needed, not just engines, transmissions, and tires. It would undoubtedly take longer, but the chances of a proper repair would be much greater. Perhaps there would be others in the class who would be able to help you. You could help each other. If worst came to worst, there was always a professional mechanic, but that was a last resort. This had been Lee's experience with psychiatrists and psychiatric drugs. It was also the experience of multitudes of others. A patient made an appointment with a psychiatrist for a mental or emotional problem that they had been struggling with for some time. There was only one repair option for the problem, termed chemical imbalance. That repair option was the prescribing of one or more psychotropic drugs by the doctor. In Lee's case, and in the case of many others, the drugs did something other than repair whatever the problem was. More often than not, the drugs caused even greater problems, resulting in more repairs with drugs. The original problem soon became dwarfed by increasingly much more difficult problems to fix, problems created by the drugs themselves. In some comparatively rare instances, the drugs did seem to have a beneficial effect on whatever the problem was. Lee had met very few people who attested to such results. His own wife, Ruth, was one of them. Her symptoms of schizophrenia had been diminished over the years from taking an antipsychotic drug, but she was also left with some bothersome and unpleasant effects from that drug. For every Ruth, Lee was certain he could find 10 individuals who had been adversely affected by psychiatric drugs. This was not a success rate of which to be proud. Lee was equally certain that if those who had been adversely affected by psychiatric drugs would have taken the time to get counseling and therapy first, they would have had a better chance of obtaining a positive outcome. Lee looked at therapy and counseling as self-help that was taught and directed by someone else. He imagined it as the brain learning to adjust to or cope with distress with the guidance and aid of one or more other individuals. Perhaps it was a sort of chemical or physiological anomaly that only the brain itself could fix by producing its own natural chemicals and making appropriate adjustments. These adjustments were somehow enhanced or optimized by the mere presence or input of others. Okay, the 8th and final set of exercises was over, and Lee sat on the total gym listening to the music. He knew he could think about the various theories of psychiatry forever and point out many weaknesses and fallacies, but what was the point of it? What benefit would it offer to anyone who was now trapped in the system or who would become its prisoner in the future? There were already dozens of opinions and arguments about being bandied about by the experts. Lee had always found the word expert to be both confusing and amusing. In his mind, an expert was someone who knew a great deal about some subject, much more than the average Joe. If this were true, why wouldn't all experts have similar opinions on the subject in which they were expert? He had seen experts do battle in the courtroom many times. He himself had been one of them. It didn't take long for him to conclude that if there were such a thing as an expert, his or her expertness was only as good as his or her bias. Everyone had a motive, and it was that motive that tinted and often tainted the validity of the expert opinion he or she rendered. We are all human, even experts. Lee was glad that he had never become a judge who had to listen to opposing expert opinions. Judge Lucas would probably have carried a coin to flip in order to render any decision based on opposing expert testimonies. No, delving into the nuts and bolts of psychiatry was a rather fruitless endeavor, except for the mental exercise it provided. There was obviously something amiss with the mental health care system. Even those members of society who had never had the opportunity to be part of it, either as a worker or a patient, knew something was clearly wrong. If it were working properly and if people were getting well, wouldn't there be less so-called mental illness? Wouldn't there be less so-called mental illness as time passed? If we were making great strides in psychiatric treatment, wouldn't the problem be diminishing instead of ballooning? Lee thought about it as he sat listening to Stanley Clarke's bass. There must be a better way. He could think of several possibilities off the top of his head, alternatives to current processes and methodologies. Surely someone had already tried these, hadn't they? In Lee's mind, they were only common sense. Had they ever been explored? Lee wondered. He looked back on his experience with the mental health care system. It had not treated him well at all. It had literally forced him into retirement 3 years ago. The withdrawal from benzodiazepines had rendered him non-functional and brought him to his knees, literally lying face down on the floor at one point. He could no longer work. He had not even been well enough to gather his belongings from his office when he retired. His colleagues had to bring them to his home, to a terrified, depressed zombie, a far cry from the high-functioning, respected scientist and mathematician with whom they had worked for many years. He had not planned to retire for a few more years, and certainly not in such a manner or condition. The psychiatric system, its drugging, and its failure to acknowledge or even understand what it had done to him, ended his career, took away his self-respect, and nearly killed him. Its only response had been prescribing of more drugs, recommending more ECT treatments, and billing him for whatever monetary fee his insurance company wouldn't pay for his care at Ugden Institute of Psychiatry. There was no acknowledgement that any wrong had been done to him. Nevertheless, Lee was not bitter and had no resentment about his treatment by the system. He had escaped with his life. That was something that many did not do. He retired with a decent pension and did not lose his family or friends or his home. That was something thousands did not do. He once again possessed his physical and mental health. That was something that many thousands and possibly millions in the system would never do as long as they stayed in the system. No, Lee had no reason to be bitter. Others did. It was for them that Lee was angry. He would use his resources to balance the equation in their favor and help them escape, survive, and thrive. There was life to live, and everyone should be given the opportunity to live it without being incarcerated in a prison when they had committed no crime. They should be permitted to walk out of the matrix if they so desire, just as he had done. Okay, let me see what time I have here. 26 minutes. Okay, Lee looked out the window at nothing in particular and spoke. A better mousetrap. Build a better mousetrap. They will buy it. He grabbed the remote and turned the music off. He had thoughts to think and ideas to ponder. He had perspectives to examine. This would be interesting, and if it was anything like the old brainstorming think tank days, it would be fun. Lee was up to the challenge. It had been 17 years since Lee had done anything technically innovative with respect to logic, science, and math, and he had been chomping at the bit to return to such endeavors. He would surely need others to join him in this quest because it would require input from multiple disciplines. Now that his brain was working well, he honestly couldn't understand why an approach based on logic and the scientific method had not been developed as an alternative to the current practices employed by the mental health care system. It was a wide open field as far as he could tell. Even those who had never had experience in the system knew there was a problem. Perhaps they simply did not understand that the system itself was a large part of the problem. How could they? If Lee had not experienced the workings of the system firsthand, he would never have had an inkling of what was wrong or how to improve it. For the moment, he would develop his own ideas about how to approach such a multifaceted project. He would assemble and organize those ideas into a coherent and logical methodology for some respected colleagues to review and consider. Yes, it would be a white paper of sorts. There was something else that Lee needed to do before diving into this new project. He had wanted to get started on it for quite some time, but he never found the time, or he never made the time. Maybe both were true. He really felt as though he should write about his journey for others to read. Although his greatest concern was for those enduring benzodiazepine withdrawal and those struggling with bad reactions to psychiatric medications, he wanted to reach out to anyone who felt stuck in the revolving door of the mental health care system. Additionally, he wondered if his story might offer hope to the supporting cast, those friends and family members who were also experiencing feelings of frustration, confusion, and anger. Lee had done a great deal of writing on blogs and in forums over the last 3 years. He had talked with and emailed hundreds of people either going through withdrawal or helping a loved one through withdrawal. Certainly, many individuals going through withdrawal didn't go to the online forums or blogs, so maybe they could be reached through writings in the form of a book or novel. It could make a difference for some of them. They would know that they were not alone. They would discover that what they were going through was very real and that there were others experiencing the same pain. Most importantly, they would see that it is possible to get through the misery and live again. First and foremost, Lee wanted to make it clear that withdrawal from benzodiazepines was very real, and it was often physically, mentally, and emotionally devastating. It was often completely debilitating and rendered the one enduring it helpless and hopeless. The intensity of the suffering could be brutal, and the duration of the anguish could be years. But for him and for literally everyone he had communicated with who was withdrawing from benzodiazepines, the absolutely worst part of withdrawal was not knowing when or if the suffering would end. It was commonly stated in withdrawal forums that everyone healed differently with respect to both symptoms and time. Even though this was common knowledge, the pure terror generated by withdrawal was so persuasive, that the one in withdrawal was certain that he or she would be one who would never get better. There was no way for anyone to predict how long it would take. In the midst of his own 2-year withdrawal, Lee had been certain that he would never heal. His ailing brain would not allow him to believe that the suffering would one day end. In the last 2.5 years, the same fear had been expressed to him dozens of times by others in the grips of withdrawal. Each one was sure that healing and wellness were not going to be part of his or her story or future. Equally terrifying was the thought that all of the mental and emotional agony was indeed a mental disorder and not a result of withdrawal from benzodiazepines. It had been pounded into Lee's head over and over by the psychiatrist and his therapist that he had a mental disorder and would need to take psychotropic drugs for the rest of his life. This was especially horrifying because Lee simply could not tolerate any of the drugs. It felt like a life sentence of doom. The experts had told him he had no way to ever be well again. They essentially declared that his life was over. He had been told that his mental and emotional distress had nothing to do with any sort of withdrawal. He had been declared without any uncertainty to be mentally ill. Let me see how much time I have here. Okay. For well over a year, Lee had accepted that he was mentally ill and maybe had been all of his life. How could he know? During those months, Ruth and he had searched for the answer in the form of a pill. He had taken several different drugs at the recommendation of the psychiatrist and even submitted to electroconvulsive therapy treatments. If a person got desperate enough, he or she would apparently agree to nearly anything if there was even a slight chance it could provide some relief. How else could Lee rationalize submitting to something so irrational and disturbing as electroconvulsive therapy? About a year after he had been released from Ugden, Lee had discovered an online benzodiazepine withdrawal forum. He soon realized that he was not alone. Others were also in some sort of withdrawal, and their stories of polydrugging and associated declarations of mental illness were very similar to his. Ruth and he had decided to stop the drugging and wait it out in hopes that what Lee read on the forum was true. In the final analysis, even though Lee had been directed by his psychiatrist and therapist to stay away from online forums, it had been the forums that largely saved his life and helped him to recover his mental and emotional wellness. Even though no one in Lee's life had ever acknowledged it verbally, they all seemed to lean toward the belief that Lee had some sort of mental illness and that he should try to tolerate the drugs until they kicked in, whatever that meant. Lee had insisted that drugs were at the root of his problems and that he was in benzodiazepine withdrawal, even though he himself had not been absolutely convinced. It had been extremely wishful thinking and was based solely on the hope that the individuals on the forums were being honest and knew what they were saying. Even now that Lee had survived withdrawal and was well, he often had to remind himself when he was communicating with others experiencing the darkness of withdrawal that he had also been in that forsaken place. He had to remind himself that it was not mental illness or a matter of laziness or failure to buck up. It was purely and simply benzodiazepine withdrawal. Lee found that the constant whining, complaining, rage, and other bizarre mood swings usually began to wear down even those with an extremely strong constitution. Yet, in benzodiazepine withdrawal, these and many more seemingly inexplicable behaviors were justified. As impossible as it seemed to anyone who hadn't been through withdrawal, such behavior was part of withdrawal, and it was very common. Yes, benzodiazepine withdrawal was a very real malady. It was a place of hell. Certainly others going through withdrawal would want to know how Lee got through the never-ending misery. Just knowing that withdrawal was real did not necessarily provide any help or comfort, except to the extent that one at least knew he or she was not going crazy, one of the huge fears of withdrawal. As Lee thought back on his withdrawal, he realized that it had started many years ago as tolerance withdrawal. The clonazepam that he had taken for 13 years had created increasing anxiety in him over those years simply because his nervous system had grown tolerant to it. His nervous system had unconsciously craved something more to quell the ballooning anxiety. When the clonazepam was no longer covering his anxiety, he unwittingly began self-medicating with alcohol. As the years passed, he drank more and more to make up for the shortfall of the clonazepam so that his neuroreceptors could be satisfied sufficiently to stave off the mounting anxiety. He would wake up in the morning feeling emotionally numb and physically shaking. That loopy, off-balance dizziness was always with him and had seemed to worsen with time. His daily routine before work had been to get up, into the bathroom, and look at the person in the mirror whom he had grown to hate, shower and get dressed, all the while shaking. He'd proceed downstairs to take his little yellow pill. After sitting in his chair in the living room for about 20 minutes, the shaking would stop. He had vowed every morning to not pick up another drink, but by 10 o'clock he would be planning his drinking menu for the evening. His life had become one endless loop of anxiety, clonazepam, and booze. Okay, let me see where I'm at here. Okay, I'm at 36 minutes. I'll stop here. Okay, let me see. Yeah, I'll stop there. I'm starting to talk about the alcohol and AA and all that. Yeah, that was all. That was like, I'm providing a lot of my story. Like in part 2, I provide a lot of like what I went through in withdrawal, like some of the stuff in the hospital and bits and pieces here, and how we're viewed as we go through withdrawal. The fears that we have, fears of this never ending. Maybe I am mentally ill. Maybe this isn't withdrawal. Maybe this is something else. Maybe this is permanent. Things like that. Interestingly, in what I read there, like when I'm doing the exercise that day in the room and I'm listening to the jazz and I'm thinking about how the system, like the psychiatric system, like mental health care system, like relies almost totally initially on drugs, at least to a great extent, and how they basically don't. You're very fortunate if you are one of the people for which the drugs does have benefit, and there really are some. But I think my thinking at the time, and it's still valid, is therapy, counseling at first, because a lot of people who go into psychiatric offices, they have situational issues that have caused, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and so on, all kinds of different kinds of thinking and so forth, feelings. And so I talk about coming up with a way to sort it out before you go to drugs. Don't go to drugs right away. Drugs would be like last resort. So I talk about writing a white paper, like getting ideas together, thoughts, come up with this system. And I have written that white paper. It's on the website here somewhere. I don't know if it's under other stuff or where it is. I put that in there like when I began the website way back almost 2 years ago. It's in there. I wrote it relatively quickly after writing the book, because I wanted to make sure I was good to my word and did it. I've tried to get it to other people like way back, after I had written it, but nobody. This whole thing is like the mental health care system. It's hard. It's a hard thing. I mean, what do you do with? There are levels of what I would call mental emotional distress. There are people that do seem to have mental emotional deficits, anomalies, whatever you want to have, like that something is structurally, physiologically maybe wrong with the brain and causes them to maybe have moods or act certain ways that we would not consider appropriate behavior for society. I don't know, but by and large, I think a lot of people in the mental health care system don't even belong there. They don't. They went in, they had some issues, they get prescribed a bunch of drugs, and the drugs made them a whole lot worse. And they are told, well, this is just your original problem. It's just manifesting itself more now. It's ballooning. Well, that's just garbage pretty much most of the time, because the drugs make things a whole lot worse, and they can create a whole bunch of symptoms you didn't even have when you went in there. So that's just baloney. So anyway, the white paper, and what it basically is it's a way to do therapy, counseling. It's kinds of questions that should be asked. Instead of like the standard 10 or 12 or so that you go to a psychiatrist, they'll ask you these questions in order to make a diagnosis. And ultimately, for the purpose of prescribing pills. That's pretty much the way it goes. That's the way it was with me, with all of the different psychiatrists I saw. You answer the same questions about like suicidal ideation, depression, hopelessness, inability to feel pleasure, anxiety, panic attacks,
delusional thinking. Like they're trying to make a diagnosis. That's all that's for. That's not necessarily to. That's so they can prescribe a pill and to at least they say to help you. I don't know, but that's neither here nor there. But I did write the white paper. The answer to this is like there are dozens and dozens of questions having to do with all kinds like situational things, your diet, your sleep, relationship kinds of questions, like to where they get to be fairly complex, fairly detailed, because whatever's bothering most people, they have to go in and see a psychiatrist, came from something, some issue in their life. That's pretty much the way it goes. I have found like a lot of people that I have helped, like here where I live, like just sitting down for a couple hours with them and talking about things and just letting them know, okay, I'm a person who cares about you. It does an enormous amount of good most of the time. And I think a lot of times, like when we go see a psychiatrist, it's from issues like that, relationship issues and so forth in your life that, I mean, if you could sit down with someone and just discuss them, like, you wouldn't need to go even see a psychiatrist. But yeah, the white paper, it actually did get written. And I've written other things too, like trying to find what's going on, like when we're in withdrawal from these different drugs and what's happening there in an effort to find a way to cure, reverse, whatever you want to call it, like withdrawal. But okay, I'm at 41 minutes now. So yeah, there are better ways. We all know that. Without giving these pills that put us into the condition that most of you are in now. It's just a sad thing. Okay, so I'm getting close to 11:30 here. Get up here and get some lunch. Have my celery and carrots and peanut butter and some nuts and so forth. Go do the food pantry thing, and then come home for a while, and then go into my son's and have the movie night and so forth, like with Eli and my daughter, and that'll be fun. That's always fun. Get some pizza up at the pizza shop up above. It's real close to where my son lives. I like to get the margarita pizza, but my daughter doesn't like the margarita. My son likes it, but she doesn't. So I'm not sure what we'll get. We'll get some kind of like standard pizza. I don't know. And Eli will probably get. Sometimes he'll eat pizza, sometimes not. Fries. They have fries up there and some other things. So get him something else probably. But that's always a good. Like Thanksgiving Eve is always good. The last 2 years. Well, 2 years ago they went to what's called the Turkey Trot. It's like a run. It's a run on Thanksgiving morning, and then I stayed there with Eli. Well, last year they decided not to go, so this year they're not even thinking about it. So, and like 2 years ago too is when I got the box of Joe, which I only wanted a cup of coffee. I ended up with this box of coffee that cost me $20. So maybe since my daughter is there, she'll just go up and get coffee for us, and I won't go up there and like accidentally get a box of coffee that could have coffee for 20 people probably. So yeah, anyway, so that's what I got. I don't know. I thought about maybe coming on tomorrow with, I had written a Thanksgiving list, things I was thankful for a number of years ago when I was on Dr. Jen's blog. And that's one of the writings, I think, in one of the rooms here on this website. So I could probably write a lot more things for that. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll come back Friday and talk about that some or something. I don't know. But as time goes on, there's more and more for me to be thankful for. It's things that when I was in withdrawal, I never could have imagined. Thinking like life is going to be good again. I'm going to be able to do all of these things. So that's just to let you know, like things do get a whole lot better. Like you get well, and it's awesome when you start to get well. It feels really, really good. It's incredible. But then as time goes on, life just gets better and better. You have a better outlook on life. I think we get more wisdom. We can view, life here and what it's all about, and what, looking back and what actually happened to us. It's much more clear to me now than it was when I was in withdrawal, or even before, even while I was on the drugs. My mind was clouded. But since I've been off and have more time, like in the book here, I'm giving a lot more clarity to what happened to me. When I was in the midst of it, I had no idea. I remember being in the hospital, standing there like the one night, waiting for my drugs from the guy that dispensed the drugs, having no idea, like, how in the world did I ever get here? What is going on? What caused this? But anyway, it gets a whole lot better. Okay, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Hope you have a good Thanksgiving. hope you're able to eat and you have some good food, and that you're able to enjoy, at least to some degree, some of your relationships with your family and friends. I know it can be very, very difficult. It can be even more depressing when you know like you should be enjoying this and you can't do it. And your brain, I think, sometimes tries extra hard to feel the good feelings, and when it can't, it just gets even harder. It makes it more frustrating. So anyway, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving now, and as always, I'm right here, and I will be right here. Happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.